that all right, Gary? Ready to roll?
Chairman, yeah. Could I at the appropriate time introduce my colleagues, please?
You may.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edwina, and welcome. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to members of the Education and Children's Services Scrutiny Committee, and also to any viewers who may have tuned in this morning. So if you're tuning in, it's really good morning. The sun's out, and I hope you all feel a little bit lifted. This meeting of the committee is using Microsoft Teams. Please bear in mind there may be unforeseen technical difficulties. However, we will aim to keep any such difficulties to a minimum. Members, please ensure that your microphone is muted during the meeting and only switched on when you are speaking. Any members joining the meeting today using a mobile phone can mute and unmute by pressing *6. This will ensure that any background noise in your location will not be picked up throughout the meeting. After each item has been presented, the committee will be asked to indicate whether they wish to speak by using the Raise Your Hands facility in Teams. Are our guests okay with that this morning? That's really, is that Peter? Are you okay with that? Yeah, thank you. So, introductions. I will introduce Edwina Grant, the Executive Director, Education and Children's Services, and Edwina will introduce our guest, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and hello, members. Very good of you to be here today. So yes, we're looking at early years in its broadest sense today, and I'd like to introduce first Andrew Cadman, who has joined the authority fairly recently to cover for a member of staff in this team who's been on long-term absence, and he's really made a flying start, and he's going to do you a presentation that he will take you through completely to show you exactly where we are with this area of work, and I'm sure you'll find that very informative. The Chairman's agreed that before you ask questions, she would like you to hear from our colleague Peter Hindle, who represents the private and voluntary providers. He coordinates that group. And I should say that throughout the COVID pandemic, Peter has gone the extra mile with us in terms of attending all our head teacher groups and representing that sector ably. And he's done all of that in his own time and for us. And he's going to comment on how it feels. He's going to give you about 10 minutes on how it feels from that part of the sector. And of course, that part of the sector is very important to us too, and its sustainability as we go through COVID. So those are our two colleagues, Chairman. I'm very grateful to them both and to you for having this topic today.
Thank you. So we'll just do item 1 first, which is apologies and replacements. I haven't got any on my list. Gary, has anybody come through to you?
Yes, Janet Hamid has sent her apologies for today's meeting. She represents the parent governors for secondary schools. Thank you.
Munsif, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm just going to remind you that I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave at 11:30. So if you don't see me after 11:30, I've left because I have to pick my car up from the garage. Thank you.
Thanks, Munsif. Item 2 is disclosure of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. Members are asked to consider any pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests that they may have to disclose during the meeting in relation to matters under consideration on the agenda. It would be helpful if members could be specific about the item in which they have an interest and the nature of the interest declared. Have we got any to disclose this morning? Pardon? Peter?
Sorry, Chair. I'm a non-pecuniary interest. Both myself and wife are governors of Bacup Maintained Nursery.
Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of January 21. I take no hands as a correct. Oh, I've got a hand somewhere. Jennifer, good morning, Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah, morning, Chair. I'm sorry, I should have declared an interest earlier because I am a governor at St Ignatius Catholic Primary, Preston's College, but also Ribbleton Avenue Infant and Nursery School.
Thanks, Jennifer. You've got that, haven't you, Gary?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Lovely. So I presume we've got nothing on the minutes. Everybody's happy with the minutes? Somebody want to propose those?
I propose them, Chair. It's Nikki
Thank
Hennessy.
you. Right, so moving on now to item 4, early years sector impacts on private providers supporting vulnerable children and families. As if you didn't hear, we will not take questions of either Andrew, Peter or Edwina until the end of the presentations. So Andrew, are you going first?
I'm indeed. Good morning, members and
Thank
guests.
you.
So I shall try and share my screen. Can you all see the presentation?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Excellent. Shall get started. Introduction and background. Currently, Lancashire has over 1,400 early years providers. It's a mixture of day nurseries, preschools, out-of-school care, maintained nursery school and childminders to deliver across all what's required across the county. Lancashire also receives an historically low rate of Department of Education funding for its 2-, 3 and 4-year-olds. For example, the 2-year-old rate for 21-22 is £5.36. This is 1.8% lower than the national average of £5.46. However, it should be considered that 44% of all LAs outside of London receive the £5.36 rate. So although it is historically low, Lancashire is in a very similar situation to quite a lot of local authorities. The 3 and 4-year-old rate for 21-22 is £4.44. This is almost 5% lower than the national average of £4.65. That's excluding London. And again, this 40% of local authorities outside of London receive that £4.44 rate, and that is the lowest rate available. High levels of deprivation. As many as you will know, Lancashire has certain areas of deprivation that are quite significant. For example, Burnley and Hyndburn fall within the 10% most deprived in the entire country, and Pendle and Preston fall within the 20% most deprived in the country. And we know that there's large areas as well as certain pockets of deprivation around there. A key priority for the early years service is to address the school attainment levels, often referred to as the GLD or the good level of development. These have a slight downward trend in Lancashire as opposed to the national upward trend. They're very similar in relation to where they are at the moment, but the trends are going in the wrong way from each other. It's important to remember as well that if you have a child who has free school meals, is born in the spring or summer term, or is a boy, they will all perform significantly worse than the county average in areas of deprivation. I've got some charts later on which will highlight the impact that has there. Challenges. Finance, so effective viability. Early years providers continue to operate in challenging financial climate. The impact of COVID-19 on providers' ability to maintain robust business delivery has been significant. Schools Forum recently agreed a one-off payment to providers to assist with PPE supplies, so the personal protective equipment, and that has recently received approval from the DfE, so those payments are going ahead. Additionally, £2 million has been moved across from the main school block to provide an 8p uplift for the 3 and 4-year-old hourly rate. So that's now £4.52. Again, this is still about 3% lower than the national average. And it's important to note there that this is for 1 year only. Additional financial support was provided in the autumn term payments. These were based on the autumn 19, so that would help providers with an uplift there. However, it's also important to remember that other government policies can undo the good work that's being done in this area. So, for example, the national living wage has risen by 2.2%. So that creates, whilst again we're all keen, I'm sure, for everyone to ensure they have a sound and good wage, it undoes some of the good work being done in relation to meeting those financial costs. And there is an increased demand for special educational need places. These sometimes can require one-to-one care and can have a significant impact on settings. For example, there is a disability access fund, which is £615 a year. Now, if you have an eligible child and you're open 50 weeks a year, that works out around £12 a week. And that probably wouldn't buy you even an hour of one-to-one support to assist you with that child. Ofsted grades. Lancashire delivers some high quality provision and can be rightly proud, I think, of where it is with its Ofsted grades. So currently 98% of providers have an Ofsted grade of good or outstanding. The national average is 97. And in the identified areas of high deprivation, the average number of private providers obtaining a good or outstanding is just under 98%. So again, this is an area where I feel Lancashire can be really proud of the great work that providers are doing. The early education funding. So this is around the funding that's provided to settings for parents that are eligible for the different streams of funding. Take up of free childcare places remains high across Lancashire for 3 and 4 year olds. Currently, this is just under 93%, rising to 95% in areas of high deprivation. The take up of 2 year old places is at lower at 70%. The national average there is 69%, so they are on course for the national average. However, in areas of high deprivation, the 2 year old take up drops to 65%. The challenge there is that the 2 year old funding is key in relation to supporting enable those children to develop in those areas of high deprivation. So we would expect, when I say expect, we would want ourselves to certainly be above the national average and pushing that forward. Private providers deliver a high number of funded places, and some of them will struggle to meet their break-even level for financial sustainability. In areas of high deprivation, the majority of children attending may be doing so through funded childcare places. This may lead to settings limiting the number of funded places that they have available, and this in turn will of course have a knock-up about the availability for parents to take those places up. Maintain nursery schools. Prior to the first national lockdown in March of last year, Cabinet agreed that a consultation on the future of maintained nursery schools will be conducted to assess financial sustainability alongside quality of delivery. Due to COVID-19, staff priorities being focused elsewhere during that time, the consultation has not been undertaken. One of my roles coming in when I'm in post is to move this forward, and in the next month or so we'll be looking at moving that forward and meeting with our colleagues across maintained nursery schools to launch that consultation around moving forward and what that looks like in the future for maintained nursery schools. Strategies and outcomes. The strategy was approved in March of last year and runs through to March 2023. The outcome targets have set 4 priority areas. These are the best start in life, school readiness, health and well-being, and inequalities and social issues. The priority targets identify the process and outcomes required to address these points raised in the presentation. The strategy, it's important, needs to be treated as a fluid document, and that we constantly respond to the changing needs and demands of the demographic in our communities. And what is also important to me is that during the short time I've been here, just in January and into February, there is a real buy-in from stakeholders about moving this forward. There's a real multi-agency stakeholder mechanism, and it's providing an holistic strategy oversight to what's moving forward. And I've been participating in some really positive and powerful meetings about moving that strategy forward. One of the early years priorities here is those school attainment levels we mentioned earlier. Those children meeting a good level of development in Lancashire are just over 69%. The national average is just under 72. As I mentioned earlier, the national trend is slightly increasing and the Lancashire trend is slightly decreasing. Early years providers are delivering high quality childcare, especially in areas of high deprivation, and this is not always being transferred to the learning school, but there's some great work starting to take off around that transitional stage. I've got a few charts now to visualise each one moving forward, and I will take some questions at the end so I can pick back up again. So the good level of development, so in relation to, and this is measured at the end of reception year. So what you'll see there is that Lancashire has pretty much stood still over the last 4 years that it's recorded, whereas their statistical neighbours, North West and England, have all risen. So while standing still isn't awful in the terms of we're not going backward or down with that, actually people we measure against are moving forward. This is a good level of development into district and integrated care partnerships. The 8 blue and the 4 yellow are the districts. The 4 yellow are areas of highest deprivation, and what you can see from there is that all 4 of those are lower than any of the other 8 in relation to the level they meet for children meeting a good level of development. And the 5 in green are integrated care partnerships. That's just to illustrate the difference on how Lancashire is made up and moves across and delivers its services, certainly from a health perspective. Good level of development for vulnerable groups. So I alluded to this earlier in relation to the impact of free school meals special educational needs and early education, health and care plans. So all children, we're sitting around the 70% mark. If your child is on free school meals, it's just over 50%. If they're an SEN child, it's under 20%. And if they're on an education, health and care plan, it's around 3%. Obviously, that's very low, and they are all within the context of the demands and needs of those children, but it gives a real indication of the difference and the impact that those different needs and demands that those children have. The early education funding take up by district and integrated care partnerships. So on the left hand side we have the 2-year-olds, so it's pretty level pegging. We got to see there it's hovering around the 70%, but we've got some districts that are just above 60%, and again they're the ones where we would expect or would like to see a much higher take up for 2-year-old childcare. The 3 and 4-year-old take up fluctuates around, but again even Lancaster with the lowest is 88%, is only 3% below the national average. Again, it gives you an indication of the demand of what those places look like for the different ages for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds and that parental choice. The next slide gives an indication of that as well. So for example, here on the right hand side for 2-year-old, so on the vulnerable groups, this might be children of army personnel, looked after children, children on a child protection plan. And you can see a real fluctuation in the demand, and that may be just because of where barracks are, or where the Gypsy Roma traveller sites may be. But the vulnerable children there on the 2-year-old, you've got Central Lancashire and Pinning is the highest. And then when we move on to 3-year-olds, there's a flip there around what that demand is. So it's a better piece of work there to undertake and really deep diving into what that looks like for those children and why parents may not be accessing certain childcare. So, solutions. Finance. Financial training and business modelling. So working with the sector, looking to consult with the sector into autumn and having an early consultation for funding for 2022 forwards and moving on, making sure we do that early and that we are robust in that consultation. In the interim, assisting providers with financial training and business modelling to ensure they've got good financial sustainability alongside the current high quality of provision that they deliver. Ofsted grades continue to support the settings to maintain their high level of Ofsted grades. There will be some changes in the early years foundation stage in September, which in turn will probably have a knock-on effect to how Ofsted inspects settings. And what we've seen historically and previously in the sector is that when Ofsted change how they inspect, it can have an impact on a setting. The setting itself may have actually got better at what's it delivered, but it may find it's no longer an outstanding, it's now good, depending on how they're graded. So it's making sure we continue to support settings to prepare for that. The early education funding, an action plan has previously been agreed in relation to the increase of take-up of 2-year-old places, especially in areas of eye deprivation. Due to COVID-19, elements of this have not been feasible, for example, the community outreach events, alongside providers privatising children for essential workers throughout the past year. The action plan will be updated and will reflect the current challenges and opportunities that we've got in relation to that area. The maintained nursery schools, we're looking at launching the consultation there within the next 4 weeks. And when I say launch, that will be those conversations with our providers, the 24 maintained nursery schools, and being clear about what it is where the outcome is, what we're trying to achieve in relation to their sustainability, their position, and the long-term future of maintained nursery schools as part of early years provision within Lancashire. And the early years strategies and outcome. When the strategy was written, it had an additional outcome measurement document created. Due to COVID, this has not been populated. So the aim to do that is by September of this year. The reason I've got September in for there is that there are 63 individual data sets that are required from our multi-agency partners. And we need to receive that information and we need to analyse it and respond to it and reflect on how it is we're moving forward and meeting those outcomes. And finally, the early years priority services continue to develop and deliver the early years representation and delivery within the school improvement model to increase and ensure an holistic model of delivery so that the skills learned in early years of a child's life are retained and transferred into their school years. So priority actions, and this is essentially where the scrutiny panel, we would expect you as a panel and a board to challenge us, is the early years educational funding for 2-year-olds. So the targeted activity to enable access to funded childcare places for those that need it most. financially secure providers, so our private, voluntary and independent providers, along with our maintained nursery schools, to be consulted on financial vision for the whole sector, and the outcome measurement, so the data collection and analysis of the current position and the future pathways. That's my last slide. I shall now attempt to... Oh, are you back on? Can you still see my screen, or can you see each other?
We've still got the screen on.
Bear with me. Hold on, it was there. Hold on, just having a moment. Bear with me.
Yeah, it's off now.
Back to normal.
Can you all see each other?
Yeah.
We can, thank you, Andrew.
Lovely.
So moving on now to Peter Brindle, representing the private, voluntary and independent early years sector. Welcome, Peter.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members and guests. I don't know whether I misheard there, but it's Peter Hindle, not Brindle.
Oh, is it? Sorry.
So I'm chair of the early years block of the Schools Forum and director of a charity that supports early years settings with sustainability in Lancashire. And I've been a provider, PVI provider for 30 years. And I also, for my sins, as Edwina said, sit on the Executive Recovery Board. I think it was the artist Frederick Barnard who said, "A picture paints 1,000 words." So I want to use 1,000 words right now to paint a picture of the state of PVI in Lancashire today. So we're faced with a quadruple whammy of chronic underfunding, increasing child needs, recruitment challenges, and COVID. I'm both impressed with what the PVI settings have achieved and saddened in the environment we have to work. I'm impressed how well PVI in Lancashire, with its 2,200 providers delivering 63,000 Ofsted registered places, have responded to COVID. We've been open for key workers and vulnerable children in the first lockdown, and then fully open for all in the second and third lockdowns. An amazing job, I'm sure you'll agree. I'm impressed how this sector has adjusted and adapted to COVID countermeasures. It's cost us dearly. Settings have spent thousands on risk assessments, deep cleaning, extra staffing, and bubbles, all detrimental to sustainability. I'm impressed that our 16,000 early years educators have risen to the challenge of supporting children in their care, the parents who need work, and the economy in general. They have done this with positive professionalism and in the face of complete lack of recognition from many sources. I'm saddened that our workforce are on or just above minimum wage, and 45% of them are on state benefits or tax credits. Does the first 1,000 days really matter? Is this how we want to treat employees in a vital education sector? I'm impressed how, despite years of underfunding through EEF, the sector has survived as well as it has. We are 15 million underfunded in Lancashire, according to CEDA research. We are supposed to be grateful for government spending at a record of 4 billion to buy 4.6 billion of services. I'm saddened when I hear stories of struggling settings where owners have sacrificed their salary and gone into debt. They do it for the children. One said, "I'm lucky my husband has got a good job, so he buys resources and I don't need to get paid." Another, "As a childminder, I have to get a second job to survive." I could go on, but 15% of settings in Lancashire are in a financially critical state. I'm saddened by my personal experience of having to close a charity nursery in a very deprived ward because of lack of parental income to support EEF funding and the disproportionate number of special needs children needing one-to-one care. Settings in deprived area right now are most at risk. I'm saddened when good and outstanding staff leave the sector because of low wages and poor progression opportunities. Staff can earn more stacking shelves at Tesco's than helping to educate children. I'm impressed that PVI providers do their jobs with the constant fear of an Ofsted visit picking up something that they missed. An inadequate judgment in Lancashire means early years education funding stops and very little support and help is available. There is no PVI recovery system. When a school has an inadequate inspection, they get help and support. I'm saddened that parents are not taking the opportunity to engage in childcare, despite it being safer than most activities, even at the moment. We're seeing low occupancy and missed opportunities in childcare. We should be in no doubt that this is going to impact primary education very soon, and it will put huge pressures on the school system and reduce our good level of development measures. We are experiencing an increasing number of children with special needs. Settings are already underfunded on a 1:8 ratio. If a child needs 1:1 care, it's not funded. And this has the dual impact on child development and sustainability of the setting. We would need to pay £35 an hour to deliver 1:1 care. We get £4.40 on average. The Inclusion Fund application process takes almost a term for us to get and occupies days and days of management time filling forms and having meetings. And at the end, we get £35 a week, not the £35 an hour we need. Excuse me 1 second. We're lucky in Lancashire. Many authorities don't show the same respect to their early years providers as we do here. Many local authorities do not engage effectively with their early years partners. Even before COVID, Forum and LCC work well with PVI partners. Many local authorities hold back early years funding as permitted by government. LCC passes on nearly 100% through to providers. Over the COVID period, LCC and the Schools Forum had supported settings with dual funding during the first lockdown, where children switched from a closed to an open setting, favourable interpretation of the National Funding Agreement, winter food and fuel payments for early years targeted children. The Forum supported the transfer of £2 million to the early years block to provide an 8p an hour uplift. Forum and LCC supported a one-off COVID support payment to PVI and maintained nursery schools, costing £713,000. Forum paid an EEF top-up in line with government guidelines for last autumn of £4.2 million. A lot of local authorities didn't do that. Upfront interim EEF payments to support cash flow. So we're actually paid our money ahead of time and ahead of the agreement. Some local authorities were actually late paying their nurseries. And LCC has started a rollout of lateral flow tests to all the early years settings in Lancashire. You know, I sincerely thank all LCC officers involved in the support of early years for what we've achieved. But with the government support failing away, we have a massive task of increasing child uptake. So in summary, PVI providers have an even tougher times ahead just to keep going. We have an amazingly dedicated workforce ready to rise to the challenges, but only, and I repeat, only if they can afford to work in childcare. So collectively, we need to push early years up the agenda. Any questions?
Thank you, Peter. That was really interesting to hear, and I'm sure I'm going to open it up now to questions, and I'm sure we'll have raised hands. Would you like to put your hands up for questions, starting off with Jimmy, please, Councillor Eaton? Jimmy, your mic.
I do apologise, Chair.
Right.
I'd like to ask Andrew, please. On the first slide, you mentioned 1,407 providers. Has these numbers gone up in the last 12 months, and do you anticipate them going even more than we've got at this moment in time with the positions we are in difficult at this moment in time? Just wondering if those are going to go up. Do you anticipate?
That's a good question, Councillor. So I'd need to double check the last year's numbers to see what the trend is in relation to them, and Peter may have a better handle in relation to the actual facts on that one. We do generally, my experience, for every, you know, as a few close, one will open. So we may have more people moving to childminding. We may have some of the larger chains taking on a smaller premise that's closed. However, people will, again, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, the national trend is there's less providers delivering, certainly independent ones. There are more in relation to local or national chains picking up providers to deliver. But I can certainly check the information based on last year. We'll be able to pull the data back from closures and be able to provide some information on that, certainly, Councillor.
I have some information. I have some
Okay,
information.
Peter, go on then.
Only that the overall number of registered places has remained stable recently. Although I'm surprised, I do expect it to fall. There have been some opening and some closing. The problem with the data is only 64% of settings are responding to the questionnaires that are sent out. So we're not getting full data, and it's quite likely that those who aren't responding have closed. So there might be a disproportionate amount in that 36% not responding. So the answer is we don't totally know, but from the survey data we've got, it's holding stable.
Can I just add there? Sorry, Councillor, can I just add?
Sorry,
we do get some information comes through from Ofsted around closures and openings, and it's about making sure, again, something I've picked up since I've been in post is around the collation of the collective data, so we can cross-analyse. And Peter's right, the what we've got in relation to places available is pretty steady. It's just about the reflection of what kind of settings are closing and opening, and that's about that data analysis, which is one of the tasks I'm undertaking as part of my role. So hopefully, certainly at next scrutiny or the meeting after, I'd be able to give you some more specific data around that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to thank you both for an excellent presentation. Thank you.
The next is Councillor Ann Cheetham. You okay, Anne? She's vanished. We'll go on to Councillor Nikki Hennessy, and then we can come back to Anne.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning. Thank you, Peter. We met a while ago when I was lead member for schools. Hope you remember me.
I do.
Thank you. Andrew, that was really fast. You don't have to talk fast. And I'm scribbling notes down, trying to, take it all on board, because that information you shared with us was, wow, it's not good at all now. So my question, the thing that stood out for me was you said that we've stood still for 4 years. Why, why have we stood still, and what can we do to help? And just on Peter's, them 1,000 words were just, wow. All I can say is flipping, this is bad. And just as a recommendation and a question, are our MPs aware of how bad this is? And is there anything we can do as a scrutiny committee, the chair in particular, to use in your 1,000 words to write to our MPs in Lancashire, and because you've summed it up perfectly, so there's my question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'll pick up the first one. Apologies for the speed there. As my colleagues that heard the presentation a few days ago, just going through, will know that actually that was significantly slower than before. But I do apologise. It's probably my estuary English, which is it goes at a rate of a knots, Councillor. Apologies. In relation to the good level of development, I think this is a point that both Peter and I have raised. It's around actually we've got some high quality childcare being delivered within Lancashire, and a real commitment. The challenge is about how that is moving across into schools and transition. And I know that there's some work being done in education services to improve that transitional element. But there's a point that Peter mentioned as well, which is really key, which is if there's a drop off in 2-year-old children, parents taking up places, and then they don't take up 3- and 4-year-old, there will be this impact as they move into education. And the challenge there is that you get the lapse. It's only when you get 3, 4, 5 years data, you really start to get the picture of where the lapse has been. And likewise, all the elements that Peter and I have discussed today, potential action plans and moving forward, you'll start to see those changes in the next 2, 3 or 4 years in relation to the impact it has. It doesn't mean we can't make improvements in the short term, but there's two sides to that. We want to be proactive in what we're doing and not reactive to an immediate challenge. However, we still have to respond to those immediate challenges. We can't sit here and say, do you know what, it will be fine in 3 or 4 years if we do A and B, because in 3 or 4 years, some of those children, the impact in their later life will be too significant. So it's about making those differences. And I think what's happened is certainly since I've come on board in Lancashire, I can see the additional work that's being done with around education and the link. And Peter's right. This is my 7th local authority I've worked with. And the respect and integration between education, secondary, primary and into early years is probably the best I've ever seen. I've been working in early years almost 30 years. And I said this to Edwina last week, it's genuinely such a high positive that Lancashire has that, because often early years is battling for its position. But the fact that other sectors within Lancashire have that recognition is really key to moving that forward. So I think just lastly on that slide, it's important to understand that on the statistical neighbours, some of them may have whilst they may be a statistical neighbour, they may have had other programmes, they may have had other financial input, they may have had certain delivery, they may not have had to have cut the level of services or funding that Lancashire had to cut a few years ago. So it's only when you deep dive into that you can really pull out the complexities of it. But that's just to give that snapshot that actually we should all generally be moving in the same direction, which is up. However, we're standing still. There's plenty of local authorities, it should be said, just as a caveat, that are heading in the other direction. So Lancashire is okay, but okay certainly for me isn't good enough. But as Peter says, we've got a real strong foundation there to move forward.
Andrew, am I right in thinking that GLD is going to be taken off the system soon?
Yeah, so the good level development as a measurement will no longer be mandatory from September. Local authorities and schools can decide to continue to use it as a measurement. However, following consultation, and the interesting part around the consultation was a lot of schools and early years providers were in favour of keeping it, but the Department of Education have decided that they don't want to do that. And as of February the 9th, 2021, they have yet to inform us what their mandatory measurement will be. And that goes back to that point earlier, we've got some excellent, good and outstanding provision in early years. And in the next few months, there will be an email from the DfE that politely says to us, we now would like you to measure like this from September. Ofsted will change how they're going to inspect, and there'll be a shift, and we need to ensure that our providers. Peter made a very good point. You miss a limiting factor when Ofsted come in, and you could be an outstanding nursery. And I've seen this before with an outstanding nursery where the manager took the paperwork home to work over the weekend. Ofsted turned up on the Monday morning before she did, and they graded her inadequate because it wasn't all on site. And sometimes people make those very simple mistakes, and other times it's as Peter says, something that's just missed. It's about working with the sector to make sure they don't fall into those areas.
And I've had that very similar thing happen to me with an Ofsted inspection, inadequate because a single piece of paperwork hadn't been signed, even though we'd gone far beyond it in the interpretation of how we did it. She said, you don't have a signature, I am now going to give you inadequate. And then we inspected under 12 weeks, about 11 weeks later, and got good. So, I mean, it's bizarre, but in that time we lost our funding, and that's wrong. It doesn't seem right, that at all, but that's another story.
Oh,
the other thing about GLD at the moment, if I may just say, is that it is a little bit of a perverse measure, because schools are measured on their performance of uplift from that. So why would they want to make it look high? They want to set, and I'm not saying that everybody does, but they would not want to set that as high as possible, because that's a difficult target to beat. So you want to set your bar as low as possible to show you've made progression, because they want to do well at Ofsted. So again, it's not the best of measures used in that way. Sorry, Nikki, I didn't catch your second question to me.
What can we do to help? My suggestion of using your 1,000 words to get more funding. Basically, that's what we need, don't we? I mean, realistically, paying a professional £35 an hour is minimum, really. And for us to be expecting to pay a professional £4.40 an hour, and the example you said that you can work in Aldi or wherever for a lot more. To deliver the service that's needed for our children, our most vulnerable children with special education needs and disability, it's got to be done. So we need to fight for you, and I'm sure everybody, all these scrutiny members here today, will be 1,000% behind you, and we'll want to support you, whichever. We'll be guided by you for what support you need.
I mean, what the sector needs is two things in terms of funding. One, it needs a more formal version of what they actually did this year. Here they increased the minimum wage, and then they gave us an uplift at some proportion. It wasn't the right proportion, but at least it was a start. At least it was a recognition that with an increase in minimum wage, there has to be an increase in the EEF. What we actually need first is a catch-up payment. And, you know, they keep coming out with the figure of we're paying all this money, but we are 600 million short across the country, which if you work it out, goes down to, I don't know what it worked out, was it 12 or 15 million for Lancashire? And what that means is that we need an extra 60 pence catch-up. And then we'll take the minimum wage increases as they come. It's not a difficult formula. But they all keep talking and being to these all-party parliamentary groups, and they're happy to talk about how much we must increase quality and delivery and everything else. No, the first thing you need to do is increase money, because with money, I'll tell you what's happened. Because there's a thing called the, I've got it written down somewhere, the area cost adjustment in the national funding formula. The area cost adjustment looks at the weighted income for all sectors of the economy in that local area. So you can imagine, you go down to Hammersmith and places like that, there's an awful lot of people contributing to make that what it is. I did some analysis back in 2016 and sent it to MPs and Parliament and everything else, but as usual, it's ignored. And what I did, I created two fictitious nurseries, one in Lancaster and one in Hammersmith. And when I looked, and I went online to look at the salaries and everything else to make up the staff. And it turned out that there was only a 10% difference. But this weighting gives an 80% difference. And that's why they're paid twice as much as we are. Now, I know that money wouldn't boost us up to 60 pence, but at least it would be a more fair distribution into the areas that really need it.
And this is where I think, sorry to interrupt you, Edwina, you know, we do need our MPs on board here.
Nikki, could you just wait 1 minute, please? Edwina, I'd like to bring you in, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think there are some very important points that both Andrew and Peter made. So if you'll just give me a moment to give you a bit of guidance. I think, yes, this sector, and it goes straight across from PVIs, across our own maintained nurseries and those that are offering nursery provision in schools, funding is tight, there is no doubt about it. And you will recall last year, there was a 1-year funding payment only for our maintained nurseries, and we've been told by a council not to make any changes to our maintained nurseries until such time as the government tells us what the next year's funding is going to be. So I think it is recognised that funding is a challenge right across that early years sector. And I know that I imagine that at the end of this, Chairman, you'll want to make, you know, instruct myself or ask Councillor Williamson to make representations. And I know Councillor Williamson has followed this funding story very closely. I would say that I am heartened and grateful that in Peter's 1,000 words, a good part of the last 500 did bring to your attention that where we have had funding discretion, we have used that discretion. And if you look at all those pieces of funding, not each individual was not a small amount. If at the end we aggregate that to the total amount, I think we will see that where we can, we have put funding in where we can, and this is a national issue. So it is a political matter about representation, Chair, and I'm sure you'll come to that at the end. But I was pleased that Lancashire's attempt had been represented. There is some learning, however, for me and my colleagues from the presentation that Peter did, which is why scrutiny is so important. I do think we can look at special educational needs, and our director, Sarah Callahan, who unfortunately can't be here today, has actually committed to talk to the PVI sector about special educational needs, because there may be things that we can do earlier or sooner. And I know that the whole of the sector, including the maintained nurseries, would want us to do that. So that is an area looking about whether we can support earlier that we could look at, Chair. And finally, on the levels of development, it is disappointing that we have a challenge, but I think it is important that we know ourselves, and we have brought this openly and visibly to scrutiny. We've got really great Ofsted results, but the actual outcomes, as Peter says, are tricky because they are measured at different stages in the child's young career. But for me, there's another area that we need to look at, which is how children are when they enter the nursery settings. because if we can do much more from birth to children actually entering the settings with our health visitor colleagues and our health colleagues, then that will give them a better start as they do enter the nursery settings. So, Chairman, you know, I was pleased with the presentations, but those are the three areas that certainly as your Executive Director, I think I should be focusing on. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikki, are you okay now?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I think I've made my point clear.
I missed, I went off halfway through, so I'm sorry. I've just lost connection. I don't know why, and I had to come back in, so I'd missed it. Councillor Ann Cheetham.
Thank you, Chairman. I think part of my question has been answered actually with regard to our maintained nurseries, of which we do have in Rosendale, and I represent a portion of Rosendale, and I have to say how very important they are to our parents, and how I have to say they have been pleased in the continuation of education of their little people, because sometimes we forget they have older children who have gone through a difficult period at primary schools, and to have one portion of the family still keeping up a routine, I think has been very much appreciated. I love both the reports. I have to say there was a heck of a lot to try and absorb and balance on it. And I'm delighted in one way that Lancashire have tried to put input into various parts of the organisation where it has been possible and practical. And certainly as somebody who sits on the schools forum, I have noticed that particularly children with special needs have been given a very good priority. The trouble is that with anything of this nature, all children are different and have different requirements at different times, and we don't always get it when they're 2. Sometimes we don't get it until they're 7. So it is always getting the balance right. But can I thank both gentlemen for their reports today, and also the paperwork that came with it, because I have found this extremely interesting. And just to sort of make it very clear, I have a granddaughter at a maintained nursery, and I have to say they've wooed her extremely well, and we're getting more creative and day by day. And I thank all the staff who are involved on all the elements. I'm just sorry that I haven't had an opportunity to see that little person in action at school, because she can be a little monster elsewhere. But you know, this is what education is all about, trying to improve social society. So let us make sure that we look after our little ones as well as we possibly can, which we appear to be doing, but there's always room for improvement. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Nikki, are you still wanting to speak, or will you take your hand down? If not, please. Next one is Jennifer, Councillor Jennifer Main, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to both presenters. And Nikki's right. Andrew, you did tear along at a pace and it was very difficult to follow it sometimes, but a huge amount of information there. And Peter, thank you. I mean, I attend the forum on a regular basis, so obviously I've seen you there, and I just think we should be very, very grateful that we've got people like you and others in the well, in the whole school sector, but particularly in the early years, because it is so difficult and it's so unfair that we can't have good teachers there unless they're prepared to work for practically nothing, and that really isn't good enough. And I know that the forum, I think, you know, as Edwina said, and as you said yourself, Peter, LCC and the forum show a great deal of recognition for what the early years do. But it shouldn't be that way, should it? And why is it that we already have, you know, the lowest rates than London and other places? What can we do about that? I know that the whole of school finance is a mystery. Nobody knows how it's actually divvied up, do they? But when you see anomalies like, you know, the £4.44 that we get here and other areas, I recognise that, then we should be able to do something about that. Somebody should be able to do something about that, if it's lobbying government, MPs, whatever. I just wanted to talk about the good level of development measure. And if that goes, ideally, what would you like to see, Peter or Andrew?
I don't think it'll be down to me to decide what I want to see. I think it will be imposed.
I think you're right, but
so
I'm just.
It's a difficult one, and I'm wholly on board with Edwina's comments about finding some way of assessing children on arrival at nurseries, so that we can focus funding into the needed development there. It's a tricky one. It's up to schools to decide what they need for their measure once the children have left early years. So I don't know is the answer.
Can I just add a point there, Peter? It's based on Edwina's comment as well around when children arrive at a setting. Excuse me. I worked for a few years, or many years, in the Sure Start and children's centres, and through the neighbourhood nursery scheme, we did a lot of that early assessment as when a child began at a setting, whether that was a maintained nursery school or PVI. Because we need, if this was the first time we was making contact with that child, it's about getting that baseline information. Just because someone lives in a certain postcode or their parents drop them off in a certain car doesn't mean there's not a need there for that child. It's just about making sure you have a process which isn't unnecessarily laborious. As I could probably see Peter on my screen, if we had any more admin to our early years sector, they'll run us out of town. But it's about making sure that we have the right combination, so we know what we're assessing and we know what the outcomes are we're looking for, and I think that's part of the challenge, is that they can be a little disjointed. If you have a child that turns up at a nursery for the first time when they're free, and they've not engaged in any other services, then you're looking at, in some degree you're playing catch up some of that time, and it's about making sure we have that early intervention, antenatally all the way through, so we can be really clear about what it is that we are enabling and building with our families and children.
And most nurseries have onboarding processes with All About Me to capture all the information about the child and the family. Before the COVID were going out and doing home visits to gauge the environment, and they could see the type of toys that the children were playing with or not, and things like that. So it's already there, and if it needs to be formalised, then so be it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Chair,
Nikki and Jenny, are you still asking for another question?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say about the Peter mentioned the 1,000 years, the 1,000 days, the first 1,000 days, and how important that is. And I was just thinking about, at last month's committee, we had the early help presentation, and I'm just thinking that probably we need to be ensuring that early help is working very, very closely with early years providers as well, to ensure that the children, we talk about children after them being at nursery are school ready. We need them to be nursery ready as well, don't we?
Thanks, Jenny. Peter, are you responding then?
Yeah, just yes, I agree.
I just saw your lips moving. Andrew, are you going to say something else because your hand's still up?
Yeah, it was just about the point Edwina made around health. Is that I've already had some really positive meetings with our colleagues in health around clinical commissioning groups, and making sure that that bigger holistic picture is undertaken and looked at, and making sure that we aren't working in silos, because what I'm seeing is some really good work. We need to make sure that it's holistic and it's meeting the needs of what those children have, rather than it meeting certain needs and other ones not being addressed or dealt with because there's not joined up. But I've had some really positive meetings in the time to come in, and we're already moving those elements forward.
Thank you.
And if I could also, sorry, if I may also add that we've had some good meetings as a forum subgroup with the inclusion service, and started streamlining some of the paperwork. The CAF report that everybody dreaded filling in for various things has been removed, and they're having additional meetings to further streamline some of the paperwork. We tend to have multiple forms you have to fill in. It's all the same data, and if we can populate something once, then it's so much easier and everybody has access to it, and it should simplify the pathway to gaining funding. So that's what's going on, and that will progress, and it's been well received by all parties. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you. Nikki Hennessy, you've still got your hand up.
It doesn't show my hands up here.
Well, get your
Andrea?
hand down, girlie.
Well, look here, just hold on. That says raise. It's raised now. Does it look
And-
raised to everybody else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just
Oh.
to me.
Oh, does it? Well, has
No,
it gone
it's
down?
gone now.
I lowered it. Oh, anyway, never
You're just
mind.
trying to keep me on my
hand
toes, I
stuck
know.
up. Yeah.
Now, Councillor David Smith, you look like you were waving before, and I wasn't sure what you were doing, so I thought, well, I'll bring you in just in case. David, you're on. Your mic needs turning on. So you just go to that bit at the top and click on it where it says the mic next to the camera for your pip. That's it, you're on.
Just apologise, Chair.
Put your mic nearer your mouth. Go on.
Just apologise for my late arrival.
We can hardly hear you. Where's your microphone bit to your headset? Have you got one?
Chair, I think he was apologising for his late arrival.
Oh, go on. All right, David, thank you. But it's lovely to see you. That's the first time I've seen you. Thank you. Right, so committee, moving forward.
Chair.
Oh, yes,
Chair,
sorry.
I've just seen a message from Sobia.
Oh, right, I haven't got one. Go on. No hand up or anything, Sobia. Yes, Sobia,
Because
come
you
in.
can't find it.
Oh.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I'm struggling to find the hand icon. So I put a message in. Just to reiterate what the other colleagues have already said, to thank Andrew and Peter for today. And also, Andrew, I was trying, I promise you, my bestest to write down the numbers that you were sharing, and I couldn't. And I wondered whether you would be kind enough to send that, the actual figures, through to myself and colleagues, because it's obviously there were some concerns, but it's also really helpful to see that, as well as the illustrative data, the graphical information, that the actual figures, if that's possible.
Yeah, no, that's certainly possible. I'll share those with Gary, and I'll get him to share with the group. The graphs, without stating the obvious, all the graphs and the charts and what I've said are all based on all the data analysis. Yeah. So I've got all the hard numbers, so I can I'll summarise those, so that because some of those sheets have got what appears to feel like 100 tabs, but I'll summarise them down to the main points, and I'll give those to Gary to share across.
Thank you, and just lastly to say to Peter that completely appreciative of the work that he did with the nursery that he ultimately did have to close in my division, and it's been a huge loss, and the work was hugely appreciated by residents, and the lack is felt significantly. Thank you for everything that you did in Burnley Central East.
Yeah, thank you very much for that feedback. It's appreciated, and I miss the nursery a lot. Had some great staff, great children, and some wonderful parents. It was very sad to have to do that. But when you've got 15 children in, of whom 12 are special needs, and you're only being paid to look after a 1:4 and 1:8 ratio, your hands are tied. There's nothing else you can do. But it is that the little bit of residual money we had left from that is now being used to support earlier settings through a scheme called EY Sustain, where we offer consultancy through various practicing and recently practicing nursery owners to settings that need the support. So something else has come out of it, which is positive as well, and we've managed to help save quite a few nurseries on the way through.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. No, thank you.
Thank you, Kate, Andrea. Kate.
You're welcome. I can honestly say, when I met Andrew the other day, he was very, very fast, and I said, please do not come to committee talking that fast, and he has slowed down a lot, and he appreciates it. So thank you.
I do apologise, Chair, and as I say, yourself and Edwina were testament. It's significantly slower than Friday, I would argue.
It's the passion. It's the passion that gets you going.
And it really is. It's Peter and I were discussing this earlier. It's so important, and the reason we do what we do is because it's important. We are still very passionate about it. We certainly didn't do it to retire early, that's for sure.
So I see we've got no more questions now. I want to thank you both for coming with your presentations, the work that you've put in behind this. I want to thank Edwina for the support she does for Lancashire. Our officers are excellent. They work very hard and it's really trying times. There's not a lot of money out there. Yes, I'm going to be speaking to Philippa. I'm sure you all want me to go ahead and make an appointment. I know that Jane's on as well today. So Jane will also come back and will report with Philippa, look at writing to government to see what we can change and why our children in Lancashire should be on less money and struggling when we are trying to achieve the best we can. We have got a lot of areas of deprivation, a lot of things going on, and we do need to make sure that we get this right. So between Edwina, Philippa, Jane and myself and the rest of the children's services and children's committees, we will move forward and get the best we can. So I thank you all for that. We're now going to move on to item 6, which is the overview and scrutiny work programme. The next meeting will focus on the implementation of the family safeguarding model since October and November 2020. So that will be the next thing. Has anybody got anything they want to bring forward that's urgent that we need to have a look at? No, so that will be our next meeting. Item 6, if we got any urgent business, I've got none here notified. And item 7 is the date of the next meeting will be at Thursday, the 11th of March, 21 at 10:30. So thank you all for this morning. If you've got anything that you've got that you'd like me to take forward to Philippa or Edwina, please pop me an email over and we'll set up the meeting as soon as possible. And thank you very much. Thank you also to Stephen there. Hope you're recovering after your op. Lovely to see you. So it's great to see you all back on, and then with David now online. That was good to see more people online. So thank you. Have a lovely day and keep safe.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
day. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Andrea.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
Bye.
Keep
Thank
safe,
you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Andrea.
Have a good day.
Okay, all the best. Bye.